Thank you for joining us for our webinar today, Clarifying the Rules on Sales and Use Tax. Before we get started, I wanted to mention that there's a chat feature for this webinar, and you can ask your questions at any time during the presentation. The chat button is at the bottom of the PowerPoint as you hover over it. We will answer all the questions at the end of the webinar during the Q&A portion, but feel free to ask questions via chat as you think of them. Our presenters today are Matt Vanderloo and Ryan High with SVA's Dental Services Group. They provide advisory, accounting, and tax services to dentists and their businesses. They work with dental practices of all sizes, from solo practices to group practices with multiple locations. Matt and Ryan use their knowledge of the dental industry to help dentists on many aspects in their practices, including our topic today, sales and use tax. And with that, I will hand it over to Matt to get us started today.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for joining us today. A couple of big questions we hope you know the answers to, or if you don't, we're going to cover today are understanding and knowing the difference between sales tax and use tax and how both of those are going to impact your dental practice. And then making sure you understand how often you are required to report and pay those taxes to Wisconsin. Sales tax, I think, at first blush, when you're first talking about it, seems like a pretty simple idea. If you sell stuff, you got to withhold sales tax from the person who's buying it, and then you got to turn that money over to the state on a regular basis. But it gets a little bit more complex when we think about it in dental practices and for dentists. Most of the services might not be taxable because they're dental services, or should they be taxable if they're not dental services? And what are we really selling, and whether we should be paying sales tax, withholding sales tax, or we have to worry about use tax. And it gets pretty confusing pretty quickly. So it's something that you really want to be on top of to make sure you're not paying in too much. You also really want to be on top of it to make sure you're withholding it from all the right places and from all the right sales. Dental practices were a big target for the Wisconsin Department of Revenue in the past. Department of Revenue thought dentists weren't withholding the right amount of sales tax, weren't paying sales tax on the right things, so they went in and audited a lot of dental practices and sucked up a lot of time in practices, pulling invoices, explaining what was going on. And then there were some practices that had to write some pretty big checks back to the state because things weren't quite right. So you really want to make sure you understand sales tax, use tax, and you're on top of it and really understand it to help minimize any exposure the practice might have and make sure you're paying in everything that needs to be paid, but not more than needs to be paid. So at a real high level, the first half of this is sales tax. State of Wisconsin imposes a 5% sales tax on sales. There's a potential county sales tax of 0.5%, and there's also a potential baseball stadium tax of 0.1%. So the entire state is subject to that 5% sales tax rate. 66 of the 72 counties in Wisconsin have that 0.5% county rate, and then there's 5 counties that are in the area of the Milwaukee County Stadium, Miller Stadium, that have the baseball stadium tax of 0.1%. But that stadium tax is ending at the end of March this year. So there's only a couple more months this year where you potentially have to worry about that baseball stadium tax. And then Wisconsin sales tax is due on retail sales of taxable goods, products, and services, where you'd withhold that tax, really the purchaser would pay it, you'd withhold it from the purchaser and remit it back to the state as the retailer. The other half then is use tax, same rates as sales tax, the 5%, 0.5%, 0.1%, so no changes in rates. Same counties impose the county tax, same counties impose the baseball stadium tax. And really, use tax is the tax that's due on the purchase price of taxable products or services that you're purchasing, that are stored, used, or consumed in Wisconsin, that you haven't already paid Wisconsin sales tax on. And the idea here is this is really intended to prevent people from purchasing what would be taxable products or services in Wisconsin from an out-of-state vendor and then bringing all of that service product into Wisconsin and just buying it out of state to avoid the sales tax on it. Wisconsin's just trying to prevent that from happening. So that's sales tax, use tax at a really high level. Ryan, how is it specifically a little bit different for dentists?
With regards to dentists, we're going to kind of look at this on 2 different fronts. One with regards to services that are being provided at a dental office. Generally speaking, most of those services are going to be non-taxable or exempt. And then we're going to look at, as Matt indicated, for the product sales that are typically taxable for dentists. In some cases, and we'll look at this in a little bit more detail later, that some of the product sales can be taxable or exempt depending on certain circumstances. The sale of the products, again, it kind of depends on whether it's done in conjunction with some dental service or it's marketing. The stuff that we're going to cover here over the next little bit, we're going to be looking at that, making the assumption that this is for profit corporations or individuals or businesses. There are some differences for, we got dental practices that are nonprofit businesses, and the exceptions related to those are really for the products that they buy, and some of that information can be exempt or from sales and use tax. Overall, dentists are subject to Wisconsin sales and use tax with respect to tangible property and taxable service when they purchase it. Absent an exemption, which we'll cover that here in a little bit. One category that's clear that dentists, have to pay purchases unless there's an exemption is office equipment and supplies. Looking at a dental practice, pretty much all the services that are provided at a dental office are non-taxable. Whether that exams, cleanings, root canals, whatever the service that's being provided, the state of Wisconsin looks at that and indicates that that service being provided by a dental practice is going to be non-taxable. Products, when you provide a service, that there's a product associated with that in some cases can affect whether or not it's taxable or not. We'll get into that a little bit further as we get further along. In general, the services need to be provided for a human being, which, in the dental offices, that's going to be the case in pretty much all cases. So that's the services part. When we look at product sales, there's going to be some products that are going to be exempt. Kind of got that into a couple different categories. The first category is charges related to drugs used in a dental office. To give you a few examples, that could be fluoride, teeth whitening gels, toothpaste. The state of Wisconsin kind of provided some clarification probably about 10 years ago that made it a little bit friendlier for dental offices and made it a little bit more kind of on the forefront of what is truly a drug. They used to kind of classify that as medicine, but they provided some clarification, here recently, as Matt said earlier, that they came in, did some audits of dental practices, and based off of that, there was some clarification provided with regards to what is a drug specifically for dental practices. For the drugs, one thing would be that if the item is something that can be purchased over the counter, that you could just get, at a Target, Walmart, wherever the case may be, ibuprofen, things along those lines, then if it's not provided with an exempt service, in conjunction at a dental office, that is going to be taxable when you would, if you would sell those products. But typically, I don't think dental offices are selling ibuprofen, things along those lines. Charges for products related dental services, sometimes these are referred to as the incidental supplies, which would be maybe gauze, bandages that go in conjunction. So, there's an implant being done, we got to use some gauze related to that. Use of that product is going to be incidental and non-taxable for the standpoint of, it's not really a sale. Sales to someone with a valid exemption certificate. So if someone says, hey, provide you an exemption certificate, those are also not going to be subject to sales tax. The last category that we've got here is occasional sales exception. Matt's going to cover that in more detail here in a little bit. Looking at the taxable product sales, there are a few items that I would say are possibly somewhat common or that you would see as sales at a dental office. Those charges for those items sold without having provided dental services are going to be taxable. Some examples would be dental floss, teeth whitening strips, toothbrushes, whether it's the Sonicare or another brand, as well as water picks. We're making the premise that if it's available for the public to purchase that, it's probably going to be taxable. So Again, if you can get a teeth whitening strip, whether go to, again, some retail store, buy that same product there, and if it's going to be taxable when you buy that from that retail store, more than likely that is going to be a taxable product sale when you sell it at your dental office. One area that has grown, in our opinion, for product sales here over the recent years is mouth guards. So with regards to custom fit mouth guards for athletes, now with youth and, protecting the youth and their kind of mouth guards, those are going to be taxable product sales. And again, we'll cover that in a little bit more detail as we get further along.
So Wisconsin does have an exception. It's called the occasional sales exception that would allow people who are making sales that would otherwise be subject to sales tax exempt from sales tax. Most of the other industries we work with as a firm, this exception isn't going to apply, but we do find it works occasionally in some dental practices in the right set of circumstances. So if you can qualify for this exception, your sale of taxable products are not actually subject to sales tax. You don't have to worry about withholding that, remitting it, and filing any reports. So it's a two-part test. The first part of this test is that the dentist or the practice does not have a valid seller's permit and isn't required to have a valid seller's permit. And assuming you can get through that hurdle, then the first condition you can look for is your sales of taxable products and services are less than $1,000 during the calendar year. So if you're selling electric toothbrushes out of the office, and when you look at the end of the year, all of your sales of toothbrushes are less than $1,000, you could meet this occasional sales exception. You have to be a little bit careful as you're going through the year. If you pop over that $1,000 limit and you're at $1,001, the state of Wisconsin says you obviously don't meet this condition, then you don't qualify for the occasional sales exception, and all of your sales for the year are subject to sales tax, all the way back to $1 for the year. So you have to be pretty careful with this, and pretty certain that you're going to be under that $1,000 limit to avoid things. The other way you might meet this exception condition here, number 2, if you do have sales of taxable products and services more than $1,000 during the year, but those taxable sales are isolated and sporadic, and the dentist is not pursuing a new business or a new part-time business. Where this really applies, where we see it most often, is if you've got in your practice, you're selling every couple of years the old dental chair that you're ready to get rid of, an old handpiece that you're ready to get rid of, where once in a while you're selling an old piece of equipment. That piece of equipment shouldn't be subject to sales tax based on this occasional sales exception. And then the part there about a dentist not pursuing a new business, that's really a kind of a facts and circumstances test. If the dentist is every once in a while selling some used equipment, that's no big deal. If they're getting to the point where they're regularly selling used equipment or new equipment even out of their practice, then it might look to the state of Wisconsin like you're trying to start a new business in dental equipment sales, and this occasional sales exception might not apply in that case. But this, for the right practice that isn't selling much that's taxable, this occasional sales exception can be a real powerful way to get out of having to comply with any of the sales tax rules and reporting requirements. The other big piece of this presentation discussion is use tax. So use tax, again, is just the way that as a dental practice, you might have to pay sales tax on purchases you're making if the vendor didn't charge you sales tax for some reason. Most of the purchases that a dental practice is going to make are going to be subject to sales tax, and you should be paying that sales tax. It should be included on the invoice from the vendor whenever you're making purchases. Occasionally, we see practices who are using a vendor who doesn't have a presence in the state of Wisconsin and doesn't have a requirement to withhold that sales tax, not charge any sales tax. So then you'd have to report those purchases on your sales tax return and pay use tax on those. So again, most purchases are going to be subject to use tax if you didn't pay sales tax. So if you're buying dental equipment, chairs or handpieces, dental supplies like the cotton or the gauze, any office equipment, computers, printers, phones, any office supplies, pens, papers, any promotional items, brochures, little marketing trinkets, things like that. All of that, you should be paying sales tax when you buy it, and if you're not, you should pay sales tax on your sales and use tax return. There are some items that would be exempt from use tax. Any drugs you're purchasing to be used in the practice, you're not going to have to worry about paying sales and use tax on those. If you're buying prosthetic devices that are going to be put in somebody's mouth, those aren't subject to sales or use tax. Anything you're buying for resale, if you're buying those electric toothbrushes because you're going to sell them to patients later, you don't have to pay sales tax when you buy them. You don't have to pay use tax. And then if you're buying an amalgam separator, state of Wisconsin specifically exempts that from use tax when you buy it. So it seems like it's pretty straightforward. A couple little things to keep in mind, a couple things that might trip you up. For example, if you're buying plastic sheets to make retainers in your office, or if you're buying a CEREC block to make a crown in your office, those items are subject to use tax. However, if you're buying the actual retainer to put in somebody's mouth, or you're buying an actual crown to put in somebody's mouth from a dental lab, those purchases or prosthetic devices aren't subject to sales or use tax. And then again, if you're buying plastic sheets for like custom mouth guards, Brian just talked about how those custom mouth guards, especially if they're for like an athlete, are going to be a taxable sale. So when you buy those plastic sheets, you don't have to pay sales and use tax on those because you're ultimately going to charge sales tax when you sell a mouth guard. So that brings up some good examples of how there's really this interplay between sales and use tax, and where should you be charging in that whole string of that new product you're selling. Ryan's going to walk through that idea and some examples of it.
Thanks, Matt. Ultimately, looking at this, sales and use tax, at the end of the day, only one individual should have to pay tax on that product, whether that's the vendor when they charge the dental office for selling of that product, or if it's something that's exempt that you'll be selling, the toothbrush that Matt just mentioned, that you'll pay that tax and remit that to the state. Overall, though, only one person should pay the sales or use tax on the product. It's not as if we should have both individuals on one product pay tax, whether it's sales or use tax. So with that, let's look at a couple examples. Our first one we've talked about a little bit here is, the electric toothbrush for resale. So where the patient comes to the office, is going to buy the toothbrush from the office. When you sell them that product, you should be charging them sales tax on that. That vendor, whoever it is, should not charge sales tax to the dentist. The dentist should not pay use tax on that. So when they buy that, if they do not charge you sales tax, again, the dentist is ultimately going to charge that sales tax to the patient, collect the tax, report the taxable sale on their practice, the sales and use tax return, depending on the frequency, and then from there, we'll submit it. One thing that you may see is, let's kind of expand that a little bit further. What happens if, when you buy that electric toothbrush, that vendor does charge you sales tax? So let's use the example of, you're buying a toothbrush for $50. That vendor charges you the applicable state tax for Wisconsin, the 5.5, assuming that we don't have that extra 0.1%. And then you go to sell that toothbrush to the, the patient at the end of the day for, let's say, $60. With that $60, you should be charging the patient, sales and use tax on that $60. However, you've already paid $50 or sales tax on $50 of that purchase from the vendor. So you, when you file your sales tax return for that respective period, should get credit for the sales tax that was paid on that $50. Ultimately, again, the end product or end price at $60, that's what the tax should be paid on. And again, if the $50 was charged, or sales tax was charged on the $50, you should get credit for the tax that you paid on that particular transaction. Another example is with regards to dental floss that, you may get the practice information that you're using for marketing. We've got dental floss here, it could be toothbrushes. The vendor should charge sales tax to the practice when they buy that product. So again, if you're buying 500 toothbrushes, you've got the logo, the practice name, all that sort of information on those toothbrushes. And, when the patient visit is done, you're giving that away, in that bag to the patient along with maybe some, sample toothpaste that, again, you're not charging them for that product, so it's not a sale, so you do not need to worry about, charging sales tax because, again, it's not a taxable sale. But you do need to make sure that when you buy that product from, whomever you're getting these toothbrushes and other similar items, that there is sales tax charged on that invoice. Otherwise, we'll kind of cover that a little bit later, but, you should be paying the use tax on that if you're not being charged the sales tax on that particular item.
So a couple really great examples there, and then the state of Wisconsin does have a couple real head scratchers out there about exactly why they're treating things the way they are. One is the distinction the state of Wisconsin draws between mouth guards and teeth guards. And teeth guards, think of those as the specific things that the dentist designs to help patients who are grinding their teeth and to prevent any damage that might occur there. That's a dental service that the dentist is providing, so those teeth guards are not a taxable product when they're sold. However, mouth guards, as we've talked about them today, those are the things that you might place in a person's mouth to help them prevent any injury to their teeth during an athletic event. Those aren't specific to dentists, so that's not a dental service, and those mouth guards then, when sold, are taxable. So depending on two products that are really similar, but one's taxable, one's not, just based on how they're used and who places them and where. And then the other one that can cause some confusion is teeth whitening products. If you're selling some sort of a product that doesn't require any service from the dentist doesn't do anything, so maybe it's teeth whitening strips that somebody can walk into your office and buy, or maybe it's a whole kit of a teeth whitening product that somebody can just walk into your office and buy and the dentist isn't involved in providing a service. That's the sale of a taxable product, and you should withhold sales tax from that. If the dentist is administering some sort of a service, some sort of a whitening treatment plan in the office, that's a non-taxable dental service. So you shouldn't have to withhold any sales tax on that. But then keep in mind that any trays you buy for teeth whitening, even if the dentist is providing the service, those trays, you should be paying sales tax on those when you buy them. Or if you're not getting charged sales tax on those when you buy them, pay the use tax. And then any gel or toothpaste you're purchasing for the whitening process the dentist is providing are non-taxable when you buy them. So no sales tax paid, no use tax paid on those when you buy them. So just within those couple of categories, you have to be real careful about what you're doing and what you're buying and making sure you're paying tax on the right things. In terms of actually filing a return, returns you can either be required to file on a monthly basis or an annual basis, and that really depends on how much you sold in the prior year, or how much you purchased that was subject to use tax in the prior year. And the state of Wisconsin will let you know how often you need to file and give you that filing frequency. And if you're selling enough that's taxable, and I've never seen this for a dental practice, I've seen it for other businesses, if you're selling enough, not only will you have to file monthly, but you'll have to file your return by the 20th of the following month. So you don't even get the whole next month to do your return. You have to do it in the first 20 days. I've never seen a dental practice get to that level of taxable sales. Usually you have to be a real retailer, a wholesaler to get into that situation. And your filing frequency can change from year to year as your sales and your purchases go up and down. The state might move you from monthly to annually or vice versa. And it's really important to be on top of that and make sure you're filing your reports in a timely fashion. One of the big reasons is because if you're filing in a timely fashion, the state of Wisconsin will give you a discount of somewhere between $10 and $1,000. And how big a discount you get is totally based on how much sales tax you're paying. But they'll give you the $10, at least $10 of free sales tax every year and give you a credit against your sales tax bill every filing period. And then filing late can also be really expensive. Not only are you giving up that discount, but there's a $20 penalty for filing late. They're also going to tack on interest of a 1.5% every month that your payment's late. And there'll also be a penalty of 5% of your balance due for filing late every time. So it gets really expensive not to be on top of how often you need to file and make sure you're filing timely. Ryan, how about a couple tips on how to track all this in a practice and make sure you're on top of it?
Yeah, so we talked about a little bit here at the two kind of areas, with regards to taxable sales as well as keeping track of the use tax. So looking at the taxable product sales, most dental softwares, whether it's, EagleSoft, XL Dent, whatever product that you're using, you have the ability to be able to set up and track those specific sales of items that, are going to be subject to sales tax. So you could get that information set up, and then depending on your filing frequency, whether that's quarterly, annually, you'll be able to run a report that will just kind of show, okay, here's my total sales collections for, let's use the example of the quarter, and then on that report, it should show you, okay, here's my taxable sales. So if you sold 3 toothbrushes at $50 a piece, 2 of those at $100, you should be able to then run a report, see your taxable sales of $100 for that respective period. But again, if you can get that set up ahead of time, you'll be able to track that, and that component of keeping track of your sales should be fairly easy by running a report out of your dental billing system. That's one component of it. The component that probably takes a little bit more work to be able to track is with regards to the use tax. It's the items, again, that you didn't pay tax when you should have, and a couple different systems or ways that we've kind of seen and talked with our clients about, and just in general, one, with their accounting software, to be able to track that, whether it's something that you're using with over-the-counter, accounting software, whether it's QuickBooks, Peachtree, or whether you use the paper system of having folders and be able to put, the invoices that you're not being tracked, being charged, sales or use tax on. So looking at that first item, the accounting software, one thing that you could be able to do is, for your categories, let's use, dental supplies. You could set up 2 different dental supply codes in your accounting software system saying, dental supplies, and, you could label it being charged sales tax, dental supplies where no sales tax was charged. So you could use that information, and then depending on when you pay that invoice, to be able to code that to those 2 categories. So if you've got an out-of-state vendor that, doesn't charge you sales tax on a monthly basis for dental supplies, you could go ahead and code that to that category. Same thing where, if you are being charged, tax on products that you're buying from, your vendors, you could put that in that category in your accounting software of dental supplies, tax charge. And again, that's one example with regards to dental supplies. Besides dental supplies, you may want to keep track of office supplies on your financial statements, and you could have those 2, same categories set up on the accounting system. Besides the supplies, being purchased, the other thing to kind of be careful of is most times when you're getting a service provided that, for those individuals that are providing that service, they are going to charge you sales tax when it is applicable. Give you a couple examples. As you've got people that come to your office, provide you some repairs and maintenance, landscaping services. Those are taxable services that you should be paying sales tax to your vendors for. And hopefully, those vendors are paying, are charging you sales tax, and you're paying that on those invoices. But if they're not, again, you got to keep track of that, and you can kind of, again, keep a track of that in your accounting system. Or the other option would be is to keep track of folders. So looking at your bills, depending on how often you pay your bills, whether that's weekly, every couple of weeks, just kind of see, okay, am I getting charged sales tax or, essentially use tax on those vendors? If not, make a copy of it, put it in that folder, so when it comes to the time frame of filing your report quarterly, annually, you'll be able to just look at and keep track of, pull up all those vendor invoices, give the grand total to be able to report as, use tax purchases.
So as we start to wrap up here, I just want to remind people that if you've got questions, please message those into us so that we can get those answered for you. And then most importantly, I think one of the things every practice should really strongly consider is working with your professionals to make sure that what you're reporting for sales tax and what you're paying is correct. That might be working with, if you've got an outside bookkeeper, accountant, CPA, working with them and making sure that you really understand and they're helping you understand the rules related to sales and use tax. Just following what's been done in the past and what's done on previous reports might not be correct anymore. State of Wisconsin is changing rules on a regular basis for sales and use tax, and you want to make sure that somebody's staying on top of that for you so that you're charging things appropriately and paying the right sales tax. You also might benefit from somebody sitting down with your vendor invoices to make sure that the sales tax you were charged is correct. and that they're actually putting sales tax on the right purchases, and you're not overpaying sales tax or underpaying sales tax on those purchases. Here at SVA, we work with a lot of our dental clients on these issues and taking a look at what's taxable, what's not taxable, helping them understand from both a purchases standpoint and a sales standpoint what they need to be doing. We've got a consulting team here at SVA that works exclusively in the dental industry and with dentists and orthodontists and oral surgeons. We've got more than 45 years of experience working with dentists and in the dental industry, so we understand it really well, not just on the sales and use tax side, but from a tax and accounting perspective, a consulting perspective, buy-ins, buyouts, starting new practices, winding down practices, bringing in new dentists. If it's happened in a dental practice or in a dental specialty practice, we've worked with it before and have the experience to help people through those situations going forward. So with that, I'd like to open it up to questions, if we've got any questions from the audience here.
Yeah, again, if you have questions out there, type them in the chat box and we'll be sure to ask them. One that just came in, and Ryan, they called you out specifically. So it says, hi Ryan, could you give me some examples of non-taxable items in the ortho world?
Yeah, with regards to that question and for some non-taxable items, a couple examples would be with regards to the bands and the brackets. Wires, those are all non-taxable items with regards to orthodontists and dental offices providing orthodontic services. So those would be, I would say, the three common things that I can think of offhand based off of what I'm aware of. So hopefully that answers the question. If there's more specific, we can follow up to that. But again, the wires, the bands, and the brackets are going to be non-taxable looking at when talking about orthodontic services at a dental practice.
Yeah. I think it's good. The other thing we should point out there too is when we say non-taxable in that situation, we know that the services the orthodontist is going to provide are not going to be taxable to the patient. And what we're talking about for the wires, bands, and brackets is when you're buying those, you shouldn't be paying sales tax on those. You shouldn't have to include them on a use tax report.
Correct.
All right, next question. If I made an error on a previous return filed, what should I do?
I can take that one. So with regards to errors, the state of Wisconsin has a certain time frame that you're available to make changes on your return. Essentially, that time frame is within a 4-year period. So based off the information that we've provided you today, let's use an example of you're filing your sales and use tax return. It's an annual return for 2019 that's going to be due here at the end of this month, January 31st. You would have 4 years after that due date, or January 31st, 2024, to make any changes on that return that would essentially be filed right now. So if you were filed some returns in the past, you've got up to a 4-year period after it was filed to make any corrections. And so again, if you've made some errors, you've paid some tax on certain things that you shouldn't have paid tax on, you can go back, get that corrected. It's using the same form, and then at the top of the box, you're able to select, there's a box that says amended return.
All right, and I think we can take a little bit more time to answer one more question. So what are the options for filing my sales and use tax report?
Really good question. Wisconsin has tried to reduce that down to just 2 options for you. They'd really like you to file it online electronically through My Tax Account, which is the Wisconsin system they use for sales and use tax, but also for payroll tax reporting. If that doesn't work for you, there's also a telefile system. They've got a specific number for sales and use tax returns. You dial in and use the keypad on your phone to punch in all the numbers for the various line items. Wisconsin is trying to get away and trying to eliminate all paper filing of sales and use tax returns. You can apply for a hardship exception to still file a paper return, but it's a process to go through to get that, and it's pretty rare that they'll grant that. It's pretty extreme hardship, but it's some sort of illness issue with the business owners. So electronically, either through the phone or through My Tax Account.
All right, great. So if anybody out there has any additional questions, both Matt and Ryan's contact information is on your screen. Feel free to reach out to them at any time and they would be able to help. So I want to thank Matt and Ryan for joining us today and giving us this presentation, and thank you to all of you for listening in. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you. Bye-bye.